Okay, so I think that has worked. So thank you very much for your time this afternoon. I think Nikki is going to share a presentation that we're just going to quickly talk through. But as Lucy said, my name's Laura McCulloch. I'm the head of spatial planning at Hampshire County Council, and I'm the kind of strategy lead for the local nature recovery strategy. So I've been working with all of the partners, all of our local planning authorities and interested parties such as the CLA and NFU and the Wildlife Trust, and we've got a whole host of people that we've been working on this. And Nikki is very much the brains of this project. She's the expert in all things biodiversity, so she's been providing all of that intelligence into it. So that's who we are. In terms of the background to the local nature recovery strategy, so this is something that came out of the Environment Act 2021. It's something that the government has asked for full coverage for the whole of England by the end of this year. Ideally, the timescales have kind of pushed back over time, but we were appointed in July 2023, and the County Council is responsible for doing the local nature recovery strategy for the Hampshire area. So that includes the two city councils of Portsmouth and Southampton, and the two national parks of New Forest and South Downs. So we've been working with all of those organisations and everybody who's interested in nature recovery in Hampshire on this project for a couple of years now. So we've done quite a lot of engagement on this, and we did a lot of engagement early last year. So you may have come along to one of our workshops that we held, or you might have responded to one of our online survey. And we did a lot of engagement targeted at landowners and farmers in particular, because I think you're really critical to the delivery of the local nature recovery strategy. We also got other community groups involved just to get some insight into what we should be putting in the local nature recovery strategy and what the priorities are. I think it's fair to say that we've had a little bit of a bumpy road, because we were hoping to have the consultation. So it's out for consultation at the moment. That launched on the 12th of May and it runs until the 23rd of June. So we've got a couple of weeks yet. We were hoping to have consultation last October, but unfortunately Natural England paused the work that we were doing because they felt that we hadn't done enough prioritisation. So we did a lot of work. And then they kind of said, well, we're not very happy with this. Can you go away and do some extra work? So between October and now, that's what we've been doing, trying to kind of keep them happy, because they're a gatekeeper in this process, and they can say, kind of tell us that we can proceed or not. So that's what we've been doing up to now. So as I say, the consultation's out at the moment, and hopefully this will give you a flavour of the strategy. And then if you want to go away and have a look at it in your own time, hopefully you will give us some comments and let us know what you think. But I'll hand over to Nikki now so she can talk you through some of the elements of the strategy.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. So I'm going to be running through a lot of maps, because the strategy is a spatial plan as much as it is a document with a list of priorities of what we want to see in Hampshire. When I say we, landowners, NGOs, the public, everybody that we've consulted with. But at the end of the day, it's a map that shows areas and sites which, when I come on to it, will obviously benefit from certain funding streams, such as BNG or nitrate money, or the plethora of funding streams that there are out there. So I'm going to start off with, I'm just hoping you can only see the maps and not the little slides underneath. Is that right, Laura? Because I don't know what you can see. So when they call it the strategy is basically a document outlining all the background work, description of the character area, and the priorities that everybody wants to see in terms of nature recovery. It's called a local habitat map, but it in fact comprises 3 maps, and these are all on the online consultation. You can go and see them all, and you can zoom in right down to field level. So the first map is basically saying, well, this is what we've already got. So we call it the APIB map. That's the name given to it nationally. It's the areas of particular importance for biodiversity. What is it we already have that we know is important for wildlife. So this includes all the national and international designated sites, so SSIs, etc. And you can see all those online in their different components. So local nature reserves is the next one, local wildlife sites, which we call SINCs, Sites of Importance for Nature Conservation, Hampshire, and also irreplaceable habitat. Irreplaceable habitat is as defined by the BNG regs, and that includes ancient woodland, which obviously Hampshire has a lot and overlaps quite a lot with the local wildlife sites. It also includes sand dune, salt marsh, and lowland fen. So those are the only 4 habitats that we could map. And most of them sit within the designations. There's very little of this habitat that sits outside a designation because of the fact they're important. So that's the first map. And the one thing I would say about this map is it's not all in good condition. We know that. So we know that a lot of SSIs are not all in favourable condition. And we know that a lot of local wildlife sites are not in good condition. So we particularly wanted to pull that out as part of the element. It was certainly highlighted in all the workshops to manage better what we already have before we start looking at restoring or creating new habitats. So that's one of the fundamentals of the Lawton principles, if you're aware of the Lawton principles, which is all about being bigger, better, more joined up. So that's just the first thing. And you can see that the area covered by the APIBs is about 23% of Hampshire. So that's quite important when we're looking at the government environmental objectives, the national objectives that came out of the Environment Act, which is they want to see 30% of Hampshire, 30% of England managed and protected for biodiversity. That's part of the 30 by 30 objective. So that's the first map. We then went through all the outcomes, all the priorities that people wanted to see from the workshops and looking through a review of local plans and strategies, including the local biodiversity action plans that many of the districts have, the catchment management plans, GI plans, things like management of local green spaces, etc., as well as what came out of the public survey and all the workshops. So I think we got in the end of about 2,000 different wants, for want of a better word, and they would then comprise down into a short list. And then they were measured against the set of priorities that came out of the National Environment Improvement Plan, which basically is to how do they contribute to the national targets. So in things like increasing woodland cover, which you probably know in Hampshire we're already well above the minimum level that the government wants to see across England. Does it contribute towards the 500,000 hectares that the government want to see of habitat-rich, wildlife-rich habitat restored across England, etc. Improve water quality is another one. So it's about how those outcomes contribute to the national objectives, but also they cover the range of landscapes and ecosystems in Hampshire, and they balance the contributions from stakeholders, from local experts and farmers, and that through to local residents. And the other important thing to remember is what is deliverable over a reasonable number of years. Now, the LNRS timeframe, they put at 3 to 10 years. So we're sort of taking 10 years because it's already taken us nearly 3 years to get to this point from when the Act was, when the regulations first came out. And balanced against the current climate of indecision over environmental stewardship schemes, the planning and infrastructure bill. I'm trying to think what the other. There's another thing that's really hanging over us all at the moment. Oh, local government reform. Who's going to deliver this as well? And devolution. So a lot of uncertainty at the moment, particularly I think with landowners more than anybody else. Okay, so we then came up with the list. We condensed it down into about 70 different what we call measures. So these are measures that would restore nature. So they're like, what activities or actions would you need to undertake? And they were grouped into about 10 different habitat themes. So I'm just going to show you 2 or 3 because they're all listed in the strategy and it would take too long to go through them. So this is just an example. One of the most important things that people wanted to see was improve water quality and biodiversity in our rivers. As you know, the ecological status of our rivers is not particularly good. And so the one thing that would help that is to create more riparian buffers to reduce sediment load and nitrates and other nutrients reaching the rivers. So we put those in as a mapped measure of 10 kilometres, I wish, 10 metres either side of main rivers and 5 metres either side of secondary and tertiary rivers and streams. And that's all about reducing the input of sediments and nutrients. And the measures also include things like looking at flood mitigation on permanent grassland, reversion of arable to grassland, etc. So a lot of those measures are mapped. Other things that came through, removal of fish barriers. So this is something the Environment Agency wanted to see. So they're on the map marked as dots where there are obstructions or weirs or whatever. So these priority outcomes are listed. There's more detail in the strategy. So it's not just about what the activities are. It's also about what the benefits would be, what the funding sources would be. So a lot of these activities are linked to stewardship options, numbers and codes and things. So there's a direct link there, which they'll probably have to be updated at some point. And then also the priority species that would benefit. So in the strategy, we also had to shortlist from a very long list of what people wanted to see in terms of priority species. These are species that already have a status, a national status or a local status, are pretty important for wildlife recovery. So that's one of them, that's the rivers. And the other two I picked are particularly more linked to farming as opposed to habitat restoration. So most of these are not mapped. These are measures that would be needed to improve wildlife generally on farmland. The only one that's mapped there is the rare arable plants, where we know of at least 6 sites which support extremely rare arable plants and plant assemblages. So some of those have been mapped, but that's not to say there are lots of other cases, places where they're popping up, and but they are in general decline, along with things like farmland birds and invertebrate biomass in general, I would say. So anything that's to do with increasing biomass at field edges in terms of invertebrates that that small mammals can feed off, that birds can feed off, etc., is obviously, as you know, a good thing. So that's the sort of wildlife friendly farming one, and then we've got put the other one in. This is the other one that's, again, it's not mapped, and we could map some, but it's like, where do you start? So this is all about improving hedgerows, gapping up gaps, managing them for wildlife, manage them particularly for things like some of the rare butterflies like brown hairstreak, white letter hairstreak, putting more hedgerow trees back in, etc. So that's just an example of another priority outcome. So we've got them for restoring species-rich grasslands, whether it's calcareous grassland, meadow, floodplain, grazing marsh, etc. We've got them for heathlands and acid grasslands, and we've got them for wetlands, coastal habitats, some urban habitats, and then there's a general one that's really all about managing sinks better. That really, it came out almost as the second priority, because it's a non-statutory designation, and there are a number of them where we're seeing a decline in the overall condition, number of indicators, etc. And because I manage the Hampshire Biodiversity Information Centre, and we do the sink monitoring, so every year we go out and survey X number of sinks. We've been doing that for 30 years, so we are seeing that sort of year-on-year decline on a number of sites. So it's about really trying to get some of those into better management. So that's the example of the outcomes and measures that are in the strategy. So I'll just turn back to some maps. This is what I call the final map. So we've got the APIB map, which is the existing sites that we know about. And then we've got this map, which I will show you how it's been put together. It's called the areas that could become of importance to biodiversity. Now, DEFRA make up these names, not us. So this is the ACB map. So this consists of everything that we've mapped that could become of importance for biodiversity. And again, it's linked back to the laws and principles of bigger, better, more joined up from all the existing sites. So when you overlay this with the APIB map, that in effect is the network of nature habitats, the national nature, the local nature network map that DEFRA, they're going to use to join up to create the national habitat network map. And that, I think, comes to just over 36% of Hampshire. So based on the premise that we've only got 10 years, if that, to deliver any of this, and not a lot of it, I suspect, is going to be delivered, it does mean whether we meet that 30% target or not is probably doubtful. Who knows what can happen over the next 10 years. So I'll come to how we put that map together. So this is the map that lies between the two. This map contains all those sites mapped on the ACB map, plus the sinks that were on the APIB map. So we can't show the sinks on the final map because they're already designated and DEFRA won't allow us. So we've been allowed to come up with the measures map, and this is really the important map when you're looking at whether something might get the additional BNG incentive of 15%, or where you might want to put plans forward for nutrient mitigation or whatever. So in a way, this is the important map that sits between the two. And this map comprises, I'm going to go through all the different components and you will see them separated out on the online mapping. And it's probably best to look at each layer individually once you start putting them all together. It can get a bit confusing, but if you just put on the merged layer, then you drill in and you can see, if you click on any polygon on the online mapping, you will see the measures come up that would apply to that piece of land. Okay, so let's just go through the components. The first one is the one that we've, this is the one where Naturalink said we'd map too much. So this is drawn from our opportunity mapping, which is mapping based on the soils and the hydrology and existing land use. It's a GIS model that says you could actually restore this habitat to here if there were no other prevailing constraints. So we use that opportunity mapping as a guide to inform us where we could focus in, which is why we call them focus areas. We could focus in on sites that directly abut a designated site or a priority habitat if it's not designated, to increase the impact, if you like, of where you're restoring is going to be adjacent to somewhere that's already got biodiversity. It's already, so you know, rather than putting it really scattered away from a designated site, it's about where you're connecting up existing sites, joining up, and it is obviously better for things like species dispersal, seed dispersal, etc. So the priorities was always to connect with existing sites, and we've usually only gone out by one field or two fields, and only if the opportunity mapping supports that habitat. So obviously looking at downland creation, you've got to be on the chalk, etc. So that's the first one, and there's a lot you can see in there of floodplain grazing marsh for natural flood management. There's obviously joining up more of the heathlands in North Hampshire. Probably worth adding at this point, we cannot put forward any measures for SSIs or international designations because they carry their own responsibilities and legislation. So they are completely out of the equation in the LNRS. But what we can do is look at measures surrounding them that would improve their biodiversity by the fact that you're extending the habitat out or you're improving the water quality. So, for example, the riparian buffers and floodplain grazing marsh, increasing that would improve the quality of the SSI chalk stream. I think that all makes sense. But actually, on the SSIs, we cannot put forward measures. So have a look at those. There's downland restoration up here and across the South Downs, and then there's a fair bit here about restoring forest to coast and forest to the river valley here, where the soils and the existing habitats would say that's a good thing to do. So that's one of the key areas that's on the ACB map. That does include, and there's some overlap between these measures. So this is, I've created this one, which is kind of a woodland themed one, where we've used, because we have to prioritize. So woodland creation, you can plant trees anywhere, really. You can plant woodland trees anywhere. It's about better connectedness to existing ancient woodlands. We've particularly targeted woodlands where there are already priority species like dormice or Duke of Burgundy or pearl-bordered fritillary. There's a whole host, there's about 20 different species that we've used as indicators of ancient woodland that are priority species where you would be helping them to expand populations. And there's, so for example, planted ancient woodlands, pause woodland. It'd be nice if we could restore all pause woodland back to ancient semi-natural woodland. But again, there's a lot of pause woodland in Hampshire. So it's about restoring those woodlands that directly abut ancient semi-natural woodland because they have a greater chance of recovering the characteristics of the ancient woodland. So we're basically just targeting sites that already abut existing sites with all this. The one that you may wonder what that means. The lost ancient woodlands are all woodlands, ancient semi-natural woodlands that were lost post-1920, which was the baseline set for the ancient woodland inventory. They were all shown as cleared, and we've put them back in where they haven't being developed, or they've got some other use that would prevent them going back to ancient woodlands. And what they actually do when you look at them is they actually reconnect the ancient woodlands where they've been fragmented. And you've probably already got the relic woodland banks, etc., that would support the ancient woodland flora and enable a quicker sort of recolonisation. So there's a few there that are based on woodlands. These are the riparian buffers that I spoke about. So the orange is the main river and the blue is the secondary, tertiary rivers and streams. So they've each got buffers attached to them. The large green areas are groundwater source protection zones, where really the only measure on those is to reduce nutrients, reduce the input of nutrients into those to protect the groundwater, drinking water supplies, and eventually reaching the rivers as well. And the Environment Agency wanted to see those in. They do look a bit odd and they do cover some big areas, and we've tried to take out some of the really urban areas from those. Then we've got our sinks map. So this basically all these sinks will be found on the APIB map on the first map, and our road verges of ecological importance, because we felt they're quite important, and if they could be managed better, that would be good. So they all have a different range of measures according to whether they're a grassland sink or a heathland sink or a woodland sink. But it's and we have included sinks where the data is over, I think it's 20 years, because we don't know the condition of those sites. So one of the measures would be to get a new survey done that would tell us something about that site. And I know a question was raised in one of our responses about how are you monitoring these. That's a difficult question because we haven't yet had the monitoring guidance from DEFRA with the next, hopefully next tranche of funding to refresh and update these in a few years. But monitoring is going to be key to know what's being achieved. So that's an important consideration. I'm just going to finish these. Wade and Brent geese sites. These are the number of sites which waders and Brent geese use at high tides, roost and wintering sites, feeding sites. Important to keep that network going. So there's some measures there. And then we had some additional sites come forward from all the local planning authorities where they're looking at nature recovery on their own land or on things like designated green spaces. So that's a range of very different sites. So put all that lot together and you get the full merged measures layer. So there's all these different components that build up that measures layer. Some of the statistics from all this comes to about 70,000 hectares if it was all possible and could be delivered, which is around 20% of Hampshire. So you add that on to the exercise and we're back up to the 30-odd% of what we've got. I think I've nearly finished, though I won't go through the priority species, only 5 minutes left, but if you go in there's a whole exercise that was done to shortlist, I think it's about 400 priority species that could be, most of them could be favourably recovered if you get the habitat management right. So they are in assemblages linked to the habitat measures. There's a number that aren't, which they need more bespoke management, and every species in the strategy should be linked to a series of measures or to its own fact sheet or land advice for farmers that people at RSPB and others of Plant Life and others have put out. So I'm not going to go through those, but this is an example of farmland birds. So list of farmland birds with their various links to advice on what can be done. So the final 2 slides. So what does it mean for farmers? Well, the LNRS is about suggesting the best actions in the best locations, whether it's small scale stuff or landscape scale habitat restoration. So you could look at an area and see, perhaps discuss with neighbouring landowners as part of a cluster farm or landscape recovery project. It will not require you to change how you use your land. It is simply there to help you make informed choices if you're putting in for BNG or an elm scheme or whatever. And there may well be advantages for that through the BNG incentive, the 15% incentive, and through, perhaps we're not really hearing it, it was mentioned once, linking it through to the higher tier stewardship schemes, whether if you're in an area, would you get first first refusal. But if you want to do nature recovery in an area that isn't prioritised in the LNRS, you still can. There's absolutely nothing stopping you. This is literally a guide, but it does set out basically what the priorities are for Hampshire. So there's a caveat, and it's on the online mapping, that these areas are mapped subject to existing data, which as everybody knows, can come quickly out of date in terms of what's in a field one day, what's in a field the next day. We haven't really mapped all the prevailing and constraints. We've looked at things like scheduled ancient monuments, but if it's already in a scheme or whatever. So there's lots of things going on that would say maybe it wouldn't be a good idea here for whatever reason. So based on best available evidence that we've got, and we've done a lot of ground truthing, but not. And if you're obviously wanting to look at what's possible on the site, then you probably need the advice of the farm advisor and etc. through to get the best advice. And then in terms of development, so the mapped areas do not prevent development from taking place, but you probably have read that local plans will have to take into consideration, or take account of, have regard to, I think they all mean the same thing, when they're looking at any development. And because BNG is already set mandatory within any development of, well, except the very small scale of 10%, and this offers you 15%, so you get more credits units for doing less. It's an incentive to have the land mapped in terms of where then BNG might go on a site, or even if it's a site that might be nearby, could be offset. And I think just something to remind everybody is definitely keep reminding us as well that the NPPF, there's a paragraph in there going back to 2012 and still in the current one, it might change, who knows, about protecting and safeguarding networks. So it's not just about the designated sites, it's about having regard to the networks of habitat that have been identified by national local partners. And Hampshire has had ecological network mapping for some time that is taken into account by local plans. I'm going to move on to the timeline, which Laura might just want to go through, and then we can take questions.
Yeah, so as I said earlier, the consultation is out at the moment. That's due to close on the 23rd of June. Then the idea is we're going to be looking at all the responses that we get, refining the strategy. We'll have to do a consultation response because that's something that we're required to do by DEFRA, and we'll be publishing that. Then we'll be doing a consultation with our supporting authorities in the autumn, and that's all the local planning authorities plus Natural England, just to give them the final draft of the document and tell them that we intend to publish, and we need to get their permission to do that. Then, assuming we get everybody's say so, we'll take it to the County Council's Cabinet in November, and then we'll publish in December. So that's what we're aiming for at the moment. And before I stop the recording, Nikki, do you want to just share your screen and just show the online mapping so that everybody can see what that looks like and how it's used?
I'll give it a go. Let me unshare this.
Well, while Nikki's bringing that up, can I just bring Bethany in just for a couple of minutes, just to put sort of a slightly larger scale policy position on the whole process?
Yeah. Hi everyone. So as Lucy mentioned, I cover LNRSs from a kind of national angle at the CLA, and a lot of the stuff that interconnects, like BNG and 30 by 30 and protected sites and basically all things nature. So something we've spent quite a bit of time on is kind of looking at how all of this translates into, I guess, on the ground stuff for farmers and land managers. Obviously, the challenge with that is a lot of it is unknown, which is not very helpful, which is why our big kind of message is it's really important to look at the consultation, or specifically look at kind of your land on the consultation, so you can see what it might mean for you, whether it looks kind of like you'd expect and all that kind of stuff. So at this stage, we know that the LNRSs provide this BNG uplift. So if you were looking into creating biodiversity net gain units, that could be a benefit. And they also have a slight planning implication. Apart from that, it's very unknown. So there's lots of kind of language around it channeling funding. Whether that means funding from kind of future iterations of government funding, whether it's funding from organisations like maybe environmental charities or potentially water companies or people like that, they might kind of prioritise their funding. There's maybe future nature markets could be targeted through. So the hope is that all of this mapping translates into kind of funding opportunities, but it is quite unknown at this point, which again is why our message is kind of, we don't know exactly what it will mean for you, so it's important to look at your land and see what you think. And as I'm sure you know from Lucy, we're happy to kind of answer any questions that you might have about like the policy side of things and what it looks like. So yeah, happy to take any questions at the end as well.
Thanks, Bethany. Over to you, Nikki. It's looking good. We can see your screen, so all looking good.
Just familiarising myself with what comes up when you click on. So the first map is obviously the one thing you do need to do is to, whatever you want to see, you've got to go right through the hierarchy to click them on. Because if you think you're clicking on that and nothing else is ticked, you've got to make sure they're ticked. So the APIP map, which is, as I said, it's the national, international designates. The key is, hang on, go back up. The keys are up here. Then you've got the irreplaceable habitat. So if I was to click some off, you'd just see the ancient woodlands and all these come up. And you've then got the local wildlife sites, the local nature reserves. And I think when you, so road, yes, doesn't include road verges on this one. That's part of the measure. So those are everything that's on the APIP map. It's all here, and if you click on any of it, you should get the reason, the name of it and what it is. So it says this is a special area of conservation. It will come up with, look, you can see this. So look at these arrows. It's one of three. So it's also SPA and it's also SSI. So there's a lot of them obviously containing three different types of designation. So just click off that one, and all these will come up with that sort of information. So the red are the sinks. I think the green are the ancient woodlands, and then you've got the national and international designated sites around. So I'm going to click off the APIP map, and that will take everything off because everything's in a hierarchy below it. And I'll just close these down. Right. And then the areas that could become of particular importance is this one. So this is the, what did we say this was? 12% of Hampshire. It actually looks more, but 12% of Hampshire. Now, originally we had this up to 30 odd %, which is why Natural England said, no, you've mapped too much. It has to be focused and it has to be potentially deliverable. So there we go. So when you click on this one, you should not really see an awful lot of information, just that it's on the ACB map. This is the only information that DEFRA want on the national map. It's the measures map that's probably the more important one. So this will just tell you it's on here. So don't worry too much about this one. Let's go straight to the measures map. So this will contain everything that's on the ACB map plus the sinks that we've brought across from the APIP map. So you can see, let's go down a bit. So when we click on the measures map, there's an awful lot on there. If you can see, it's minus all the SSIs. So there are gaps where the SSIs are. That does cause a little bit of a problem when you're looking at, why is a river suddenly stopped here and reappears the other side? And we've made sure that the rivers are still show as running through sinks, for example, because I think water quality within a sink is as important as outside it, depending on the sink. So you can see they're all here. If I clicked off the sinks, what you can see there is the sinks overlap so much ancient woodland that actually it doesn't change too much, but there are ancient woodlands replacing. So if you look at the woodland one, you can see it's woodland creation here, This one is restoring pools woodland. This one is about managing historic parkland in terms of succession planting for veteran trees, managing the grasslands, etc. And then we've got the ancient woodlands targeted for priority species management. So if you clicked on all of them, what you'd actually see, so I'm just going to click on Harewood, Mitchell Deaver Woods. Not sure what's going to come up, but let's see. You've got 4 measures here. One of them, it actually is new survey required because it hasn't been surveyed for quite a while. It supports priority species. So it's been targeted for management for priority species. It's actually been targeted for actively managed existing native woodland. And I should add that Forest Enterprise have given us a load of woodlands which they want to see managed better for wildlife. So they're the ones that's came to us with the maps and said, this is what we're planning on doing within these woodlands. So it's important they're on, because they want, it's part of their future planning. And it also tells you it's targeted for, I'm trying to think why that one is. I'll have to go back to targeted for, yeah, for priority species. So there's some woodland creation, restoration in there for pause woodland. So if you were to, if you just going to show you an example of zooming off. So these are the lost woodlands. These are woodlands that have all been cleared since the 1920s. And you can see how they directly abut and sit adjacent to existing woodlands. So it's where ancient woodlands have basically been fragmented. So they would come up with create and manage new native woodland there, because they're obviously something else now. Pink are the source groundwater source protection zones. No, they're not. I think they must be. These are historic parks. So the one thing I would mention about the historic parks is they were based off the Natural England's layer on the Magic website, priority habitats. They do need some work on them that we're going to do just to improve the boundaries and take out some of the obvious development that's now occurred. So, for example, we were talking about Stoneham Park in Eastleigh earlier. That is now largely housing development, but they still want to retain an element of the framework of the historic park, because there are still veteran trees and open spaces within the development. So it's really about just making sure they're sensible, the boundaries. So when you go through, there's all these are on there, all as separate layers. You can click them on and off, so you can see exactly what's being proposed and where. And then obviously you just bring it all up as a total. I think that's probably enough just to show you how it all works. The blue being the riparian buffers, which, yeah, that's all right. It was just the way the digital, I thought that looked a bit betty. So they're all on, and they come from Environment Agency's detailed river lines. So sometimes they seem to appear and disappear, and that's because they're shown where they're culverted and go underground. So that's the reason they sometimes look a bit odd. But yeah, shall I stop sharing that one, or is anybody wanting to delve into it anymore? I mean, please play around with it in your own time and see what we want to know is how accurate.
Nikki, thanks. I mean, you can see the passion that Nikki has for mapping. I think it's evident to the whole of the audience here, and the amount of work that has gone into this strategy for Hampshire. So I suppose the only other thing, Nikki, you could mention is how somebody might look at their land and then respond to you if they're happy, not happy, or have any questions. Before we go to Gabrielle, I'm conscious you have had your hand up for ages, so if we can just go through that and then we'll go to Gabrielle.
Yeah, so something we should have done earlier, but I think it's going to go live tomorrow, is there's going to be some forms on there which is all about, is there any land you want to see added and why? So there's a whole load of drop down lists as to why you would like to add your land in, and then we've also got why is there any land that you want to see removed, and is it about inaccuracy of the data? Is it about it's already got development on it because we haven't managed to scrub out everything that's being built on? And basically, it's about is other conditions there that would not make it possible to create that habitat or to restore the habitat. So I think the thing to point out is if the site and what's being proposed is part of the network and the integrity of the network and the coherence of the network, then it probably might not get removed because you could just ignore it. If anything, being mapped means it could increase income through the whole range of funding streams that might come on board. I know it's difficult at the moment. I understand that completely in terms of the uncertainties ahead. But really, the advice from DEFRA is only take it off if it's actually not physically possible to restore or create that habitat because it's already built on, or we've completely got the data wrong, which I'm hoping we haven't, because we've used quite a lot of good data sets, including national soils and etc. So kind of my answer.
Brilliant. Let's go. Laura, is there anything to add before I go to Gabrielle?
No, not from me. Are you happy for me to stop the recording at this point?
Yeah, I think unless there's any generic questions, then if we just stop recording, then we can go to an open Q&A and kick off with Gabrielle.